Hello, and welcome back to my podcast, Cross Currents. I'm your host, Rashid Abu-Al-Sam in Houston, Texas. This week, we have the final ceasefire agreement between Hamas and Israel. We also have the Nobel Peace Prize that went to the Venezuelan political activist Maria Corina Machado. We also have President Donald Trump's ridiculous efforts to try and get the Nobel Peace Prize for himself. And finally, a small bit about buying expensive leather bags and how Americans are becoming consumed with overconsumption and how we can tackle it nowadays. So welcome to the show. Finally, a ceasefire was announced this week between Hamas, the Palestinian political movement that had ruled Gaza for many years, and Israel. This comes after 730 days of heavy bombardment of Gaza by Israel every day, the killing of 65,000 Palestinian civilians, including women, children, and men, and of course, the 1,200 Israelis that were killed by Hamas on October 7th, 2023, and the many Israelis that they took hostage. Today, October 10th, 2025, there are estimated to be 20 Israeli hostages still alive, and I think 24 who are dead and whose bodies are still with Hamas. President Trump, to his credit, really pushed very, very hard for this agreement to go through. As usual, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was dragging his feet, saying, no, 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 we have to keep fighting until we get rid of Hamas completely. And in doing so, they targeted all these high-rise apartment buildings in Gaza City, and, one by one, they were knocking them all down with missiles, saying, oh, we think some Hamas people are living in this building or working from this building. So, these pictures that have come out of Gaza are just incredible. It looks like, Dresden in Germany during World War II, when it was just completely flattened by the Allies. In this case, Gaza has been completely flattened by the Israelis. And who has been supporting the Israelis and giving them all the bombs and necessary weapons? The United States, of course, with Donald Trump as their main supporter. So it's really, really, really bad. And so this final agreement to have a ceasefire was really welcomed by both sides. We saw pictures of Palestinians dancing and singing, and then we also saw pictures of members of Israeli families who have hostages taken by Hamas dancing in a square in Tel Aviv, so happy that, they're going to finally have some of their relatives given back to them by Hamas. President Trump has said he thinks the prisoner exchange, because Hamas asked that around 1,500 Palestinians currently in Israeli jails be released in exchange for the hostages, Israeli hostages who are still alive, and the bodies of those who died already. And President Trump said he thinks this is going to happen on Monday or Tuesday. Today is Friday. President Trump literally, I'll use a metaphor. He was like a giant elephant, and he just sat down on top of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and squashed him and said, you are going to accept this ceasefire agreement. Because Netanyahu kept saying, maybe we're going to have a ceasefire, but oh no, we can't have a ceasefire. We have to keep fighting. And he just dragged this war on unnecessarily for 2 years. Today I saw an interview of an Israeli negotiator saying that he had a deal with Hamas, in April of last year to end the war in Gaza, and that he took it to the Israelis and they said no, because we'll only do it if the Americans accept it. He took it to the Americans and they said no, we're not interested. They turned him down. Um, and so it never happened. So just imagine if they had come to this ceasefire agreement in April of last year, how many thousands of lives of innocent Palestinians would have been spared, and how much destruction and death would have been avoided in Gaza if all sides had accepted this ceasefire agreement. It really boggles the mind. As we all know, Prime Minister Netanyahu is a criminal. He's responsible for all these deaths of innocent Palestinians, and he's currently on trial for corruption. And that's why he just brought in all these extreme right-wing cabinet members. He made a coalition with these parties, and they just egged him on and said, no, you have to keep fighting, you have to keep killing them, we want to get rid of all the Palestinians, and we want to annex the West Bank. Thankfully, President Trump told him that they can't just annex the West Bank willy-nilly. But of course, Netanyahu has announced more and more Israeli settlements in the West Bank. Many people think that a two-state solution is no longer possible because of the status quo on the land. I think it's still possible. And I think that it's something that should be, worked towards very quickly. Because as we speak, the Palestinians are having less and less land available to them as the years go by. The initial partition agreement that the UN did in 1948 when they created Israel was that half of Palestine would become Israel and half would be for the Palestinians. But the Palestinians rejected it because they thought that they had been unfairly thrown out of their ancestral homes, which they had, by the Jewish immigrants. And, with the expansion of these Israeli settlements into the West Bank, the available land for a viable Palestinian state has just shrunk and shrunk and shrunk over the decades. So I really think the Palestinians should get their act together and, stop fighting against Israel so much and try to coexist with them and get, world support for everything they've done. It's really amazing how U.S. public opinion has completely turned against Israel because of the genocide that they committed in Gaza. Even Republicans have turned against Israel, like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia. She's completely against Israel. She's given all these speeches saying, why are we sending billions of dollars to Israel, and we're having, cutbacks to health insurance in the U.S., to healthcare and to Medicare. It's just ridiculous. And this new study that came out this week from Brown University estimated that the U.S. has sent $38 billion to Israel in this year alone. Can you imagine? $38 billion. And we have Americans living on our streets who are homeless. And we have hundreds of thousands of Americans with medical debt, with student debt. They just don't have enough money to pay back these debts. And then we keep sending billions and billions to Israel for what? How is Israel a strategic, interest of the U.S.? I just don't get it. So, but many questions in the ceasefire agreement were left unanswered. Of course, there was an original ceasefire agreement that had 20 points, and one of them was called for the disarmament of Hamas, that they would give up all their offensive weapons, and that their missiles would be stored in Egypt, and that Hamas fighters and leaders who wanted to leave Gaza would be given, free access corridors to get out of the territory, the Palestinian territory of Gaza. And then, who's going to rule Gaza now? The Gulf states and Arab states, Egypt and other states, they agreed to this 22-point plan of ceasefire. And they are supposedly going to contribute to an international security force that will be deployed into Gaza. The U.S., according to President Trump, has already decided it will be sending 200 American soldiers to Israel to help in the policing of this ceasefire agreement. But no news yet about which countries are going to contribute directly to this international force in Gaza. But everybody is very hopeful. Finally, Israel has stopped bombing Gaza every day. They did it all day yesterday because the Israeli cabinet was only meeting late at night. Actually, they only approved the ceasefire agreement at like 1:30 in the morning Israeli time today on Friday. And it was just ridiculously delayed. Of course, President Trump has already been invited to address the Knesset in Jerusalem and talk about this peace plan. And he says he wants to go to Egypt to see the signing of the agreement between Hamas and Israel. I don't know if that's true or if that was just a rumor. So things are really moving fast, and I think we do have reason to be hopeful, that finally all this bloodshed will stop, and hopefully we'll find a way forward to having, peaceful rulers in Gaza who won't be lobbing missiles at Israel all the time. Hopefully Gaza will not be strangled by Israel as it has been over these past few decades, where Israel controls all of its land borders and does not let people in or out, does not let goods in or out easily. They restrict the types of things that can go into the Gaza Strip, and they hold up, trucks carrying all these goods, food and other essential items. They hold them up at the border all the time. So it's really been hell if you're a Gazan to live in Gaza, because you're basically, these, Gazans have basically felt like they're living in an open air prison with the Mediterranean on one side and then surrounded on all the other sides by Israel, who's just been, hostile towards them. So let's see. Hopefully the Palestinian Authority, which rules over the West Bank, headed by Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, will be invited in to help govern Gaza post-Hamas. And hopefully they'll keep Hamas leaders out of the government of Gaza, because I don't think they can be trusted anymore. They're just too radical, and they did that ridiculous attack on October 7th in 2023, and look what happened. All of Gaza was destroyed, and 67,000 Palestinians were killed, and so many more were maimed and lost limbs, lost legs, lost hands, lost arms. For what? Just to say, we killed 1,200 Israelis and we caught them off guard, and then we got some hostages. It's just ridiculous. There's no fairness and no comparison between the deaths on both sides. They have to realize that Israel is very, very strong. They have the strongest army of the Middle East. And as long as America backs them 100%, they're going to be in power. So they're going to have to learn to live with Israel and just accept it. So let's see what happens on Monday and Tuesday. Early this morning, at least U.S. time, the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize for 2025 was announced in Oslo, Norway. And the winner was Maria Corina Machado, who's a Venezuelan peace activist. She's a fierce opponent of Nicolas Maduro, the socialist current president of Venezuela, who has won various elections that were not considered fair and free. He has completely misruled Venezuela. He's driven the economy into the ground. Despite Venezuela having the largest oil reserves in the world, he's managed to run their national oil company also into the ground. And the situation is so dire in Venezuela. There's so much poverty and people are struggling so much that there's just been mass migration of Venezuelans out of Venezuela. Hundreds of thousands of them have gone to neighboring Colombia. Some have gone to Brazil. Others have gone to Lima in Peru. Some have gone to Bolivia. Some have been able to find jobs there and work peacefully. Others have not had so much luck. Many have, taken the perilous journey up the Central American strip there, going through Panama, Honduras, Guatemala, and then Mexico, and then illegally crossing into the U.S. Of course, this year, with Trump in power, he's closed down severely all of the U.S. Land borders with Mexico. So that has cut down tremendously on the amount of illegal immigrants coming in from Central and South America. Many leftists have criticized the Nobel Peace Prize Committee to have awarded it to Machado, saying that she was a U.S. asset and a pawn of the CIA. There's an old picture of her meeting President George W. Bush when he was in office, and they're meeting at the White House. And more recently, she wrote a long letter to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, asking him for help to militarily intervene in Venezuela and overthrow Nicolas Maduro. She said, if this happened and they were successful, she pledged when she became president, hopefully through elections, that she would move Venezuela's embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That would be one of the prizes that the Israelis would get for helping her and other opposition leaders in Venezuela overthrow Nicolas Maduro. Now, Nicolas Maduro has for a long time been under a lot of American machinations against him. I'm sure the CIA has been plotting for years now against him, giving money to the opposition parties and politicians in Venezuela, funding groups that are very critical of Nicolas Maduro. But he has been such a failure as a president, and he has failed in being able to help economically the vast majority of the Venezuelan population. So, I think anything would be better than him, even Maria Corina Machado. So let's see what happens. Related to this whole Nobel Peace Prize push, President Trump of the U.S. has been pushing for a long time, saying that he deserved to get the Nobel Peace Prize. And this week, his comments escalated. And he was, openly saying in cabinet meetings and in press conferences that he has solved 8 wars around the world and that he deserved to get the Nobel Peace Prize. And nobody else, was as deserving of getting this prize than him. And it got to such a level of hysteria that the Norwegian government yesterday admitted in the press that they were ready to face retaliation from President Trump, such as imposing higher tariffs on Norwegian goods or even trying to invade Norway if he didn't win the Nobel Peace Prize this year. And he didn't. So when a foreign government is leery of our U.S. president because of what he could do to seek revenge for not getting what he wanted, which was a peace prize, that's really worrying and very, very, very shameful for us Americans to think that our leader could, cause this sort of reaction in a foreign government. But many said, oh, well, maybe the giving of the award to Machado was sort of a wink towards Trump, since Trump has ordered the U.S. military to attack these supposed drug speedboats that are seen by satellite leaving Venezuela. And he's already attacked, I think, 3 or 4 of them. And they just, shoot a missile onto them and it blows up, and he unclassifies the images that they have from satellites and they release it to the press. And of course, he takes full credit for it and says, oh, they were bringing drugs into our country, fentanyl, to kill Americans. So that's why we're blowing up these speedboats, even though most of the fentanyl that comes into the U.S. comes in through Mexico, because Mexico has the processing facilities for that. The Mexican drug cartels are responsible for that. I'm surprised that he hasn't ordered the U.S. military yet to attack drug targets in Mexico. A few weeks ago, the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, did say something about that it would be, atrocious if the U.S. dared intervene militarily in Mexico. So I don't know if the amount of fentanyl coming into the U.S. has dropped significantly this year because of Trump's efforts to shore up our borders or not. It remains to be seen. But hopefully this is the end of hearing Trump complain about not getting the Nobel Peace Prize. And hopefully he will stop all the shenanigans he's been doing in the U.S., such as sending National Guard to Democratic states and cities, like in Portland, Oregon. He said, oh, the city is on fire. It's burning down, blah, blah, blah. He's lying through his teeth. He is a complete liar, because these Antifa demonstrations that they had in Portland, Oregon a few years ago took place in 1 square mile around an ICE detention facility in Portland, in downtown Portland. That was it. The city is not on fire. It's not in mayhem. They're not having a mini war there. But Portland, Oregon became this symbol for these enraged extreme right-wing Republicans like Trump, for them to say, no, we need to intervene. We can't let these Antifa people get away with, attacking our police or trying to defund our police. And then in Chicago, he's faced complete opposition from Illinois Governor Pritzker and from the mayor of Chicago. But just 2 days ago, Trump said, oh, I think Pritzker and the mayor of Chicago should be arrested. What the hell is that? Since when does the president of the U.S. say, oh, I think, this governor and this mayor should be arrested because I don't like them? It's just ridiculous. They're resisting Trump sending ICE agents and sending National Guard troops from Texas to Illinois because our stupid governor here in Texas, Greg Abbott, volunteered, Texas National Guard troops. It's just ridiculous. The Republicans, or at least Trump and his administration, led by Stephen Miller, his complete Nazi Jewish aide, who gives him all these crazy ideas of like, oh, we have to send in troops. Oh, we're going to use the Insurrection Act to justify deploying U.S. military troops on U.S. soil, because according to our Constitution, that is not allowed. U.S. troops, military troops, are only for use overseas for offensive reasons, not for defensive reasons domestically. So already Trump is, breaking a constitutional law by doing these deployments of National Guard troops into other states. It's just ridiculous. So here in our last segment, I want to talk about the massive amounts of marketing pushes that the average American consumer is exposed to on a daily basis. One of my other jobs that I do is I review leather handbags for my YouTube channel. And I've become a victim of this marketing push by companies to get us to buy their goods, just like so many millions of other Americans have. And I've become sort of addicted to watching, unboxing videos of new Coach leather bags by collectors on YouTube. But it's really become ridiculous. Some of these super collectors, you watch their videos, 90% of them are women. And some of these super collectors, they film themselves in their house, but they have these built-in shelves behind them, just stuffed full with designer bags. It looks like they have 200, 300 bags. And you just wonder, what do you do with all these bags? Surely they don't use all of them all the time. So I don't know. I think collecting things like that does become an addiction. And I found myself wanting to buy more and more bags also, which is not good. And then just a few days ago, the New York Times ran a very interesting article about this woman. They used this young New York woman who worked at a famous magazine in New York, who came from, working class background. And when she joined this magazine after college, she saw that it was, a fashion magazine, and everybody was wearing, really expensive, fashionable clothes. They had the latest handbags, designer handbags. They had designer jewelry. They had designer watches, and she wanted to fit in. So when she got, her first few salaries, she started buying things. And then she realized that she could buy things through these companies such as Afterpay and Klarna that let you divide up your payments over 6 months, a year, sometimes even 2 years, of course, with interest. They make it seem so easy, like, you want this $4,500 Balenciaga leather bag? No problem. You can pay for it on 12 payments of only $80 a month. So when they pitch the ease of using their services, you do get sucked in and think, oh my God, it suddenly makes things that were totally out of reach economically seem reachable. So this woman, in the end, she racked up $50,000 of debt on her credit cards because she just went on a spending orgy and bought, designer shoes, designer handbags, lots of handbags, designer clothes, designer everything. And finally, she had to stop when she could no longer get any of these credit companies to give her credit to buy things in installments. So I think it is a wake-up call for all of us Americans and people around the globe to sort of resist this overconsumption that we are prodded into doing. For example, I go to the Coach website, I think at least once or twice a day. And if you click on certain things and you have an account with them, their bots, register it. And then Coach immediately sends you an email like 20 minutes later saying, we saw you were browsing. This item is selling out fast. You better buy it now. Click here. So it's really smart marketing on their part, but it's terrible for the consumer because it just makes you feel like, oh my God, I have to buy this. It's fear of missing out, FOMO. And these companies create fake scarcity saying, oh, there's only 2 handbags of this model left, making you think, oh, you have to buy it now. You'll never find that model again. And then after a week, they've restocked that model. So, they basically lie to you to get you to click and use your credit card and buy more bags, buy more clothes, buy more shoes. I think we should stop sometimes and think about this and think, do I really need another bag? Am I going to use this bag a lot? Or is it just going to sit on my shelf behind me when I make videos? That's all I have for you guys this week. Please, if you liked my podcast, subscribe, like my podcast, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.